How you doing today? So, today we're going to talk to you about Wargaming and You. So, let's talk quickly about what really is Wargaming. Well, Wargaming usually is an analog, tabletop game. You have miniatures that you spend your time painting, sculpting, and making sure they look dope. And when we say dope like that, it's because it gives you that feeling in your stomach of like making something that's awesome and personal, but still looking amazing, and people go, wow, that looks awesome. So that's why people really like this. And above all else, when you're putting your time and effort into that, you're putting in an investment. It's a very high involvement purchase and high involvement activity. Also, people can spend anywhere from like 300 to like 10 grand on this hobby. So it is worth a lot of money, and it's a really high investment into this game.
Awesome. Looking at the sort of target market for wargaming, what we find is that it's typically male, usually with individuals being between their 20s and 40s. Usually before 20, you have more financially stable interests, as this is a very expensive hobby, and individuals below that don't really have a means of collecting the money to pay for this. And then past 40s, generally you have other hobbies that are better fitted towards your advanced age. A second point is that they usually have a lot of expendable income. This is due to the fact that most wargamings are very expensive, not only from the initial purchase where you buy a lot of materials and supplies and the tools you use to make your army, but also going forward. As new units are released and new armies are introduced, that usually carry a very steep improvement cost to buy them. Because of this, it is generally associated with the upper middle class. As we'll get to next, we'll see that that isn't always the case. So what makes Vermont special? What makes it different than the average national consumer of wargaming? The first part is that there is a much higher community engagement. This is due to Vermont being, fairly dispopulated and not as dense as other areas within the United States and worldwide. Because of this, a lot of the centers for where people gather for wargaming is very concentrated in these very specific areas. And usually, if you want to go somewhere else, you have to venture out an hour or so to find somewhere else, which for some people isn't an option. So that means that the community that you end up being with is the one you're going to have for probably as long as you continue to be in the area and play wargaming. Because of that, there's a higher sense of community, and that leads to generally a better experience with wargaming in general. The second part is that there is a generally lower income amongst these players. This is due to the fact that because things are a lot more centralized and there's a lot less choice within what hobbies you can pursue within Vermont. Generally, they put all their eggs in one metaphorical basket and then go all in with wargaming and spend a lot of their spendable income on that. Where otherwise they could possibly spend that on movies and games and other sort of activities that they generally do not have the ability to spend on currently here. There's also the fact that because this is their only hobby in many cases, there's a higher level of specialization amongst their armies, and they generally put more time into their armies than the national average player of wargaming would.
So when we talk about what games are really in the market, there's about 40 games out there. There's only really 3 to talk about. One is Star Wars Legion. It's a new kid on the block. A lot of people are just getting into it. Not a whole lot of people have money invested in it. Then there's Warhordes was started a couple years ago. It's not necessarily the most polished game out there, but definitely produces good quality miniatures for a lower price. And then we have, the granddaddy of them all, Warhammer 40K. Warhammer 40K has been in production and been playing for over 30 years. People have been playing this game for 30 years. So the amount of money, the amount of time, and the amount of fun people have had with this game are huge. And people know the Warhammer 40K brand and the Games Workshop brand as like, this is the pinnacle of miniature wargaming. This is a huge, huge market that they own, essentially. Warlords came up about 4 years ago. They're the ones like, we're gonna take down the Games Workshop, and that just hasn't happened. And now Fantasy Flight, who's making Star Wars Legion, are the next people in line being like, I want to take over this like huge kingdom. I want to take over this market because there's tons of money to be made here. And frankly, Fantasy Flight has already done that. They take amazing IP, like some of the Warhammer 40K stuff, and make other tabletop games out of it, and make tons of money. So they are very
poised to do the same.
So we talk about chain of purchases. As you can see, my wallet is empty, his wallet is empty. Everyone who plays this game, their wallet is empty. Because when you get into this game, as I mentioned before, a bare minimum is usually around $300. And we're thinking, what does that buy you? Well, you gotta buy your miniatures. Well, you gotta buy enough miniatures so you can play. So that's around 1,000 points for the miniatures. That's like $300. And you go, oh cool, they're already in the box and they're painted. Nope, guess again, they're on sprues, which means you need to be able to cut them out. You need to be able to file them down to the right size, get off those mold lines. You need to paint them. And painting, you think, oh, I just slap one coat of paint on them and they're done. Guess again, there's a lot more paint that goes into it. There's different bases, highlights, washes, and even glazes if you're really feeling into it. And each give a different effect on the miniature to make it look lifelike. And then we look at like how do you actually play the game? Well, you need a ruler. Okay, and probably the most like I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but you need a paintbrush. And you'll see later that a lot of people value that paintbrush more than anything else. And then also rulebooks. If you're playing Warhammer 40K, you have a general rulebook that is just about how the game is played, how you as a player function within the universe of the game. Then there is the army book, which specializes on the rules for your army, because guess what? They don't centralize that kind of stuff, because that'd be 10,000 pages worth of knowledge, and of course that's just too easy. And then if you're playing War Machine and Hordes, they kind of have one giant book, and Legion is about the same, they have one giant book as well. And generally those two games do not take as much painting and like effort to get the painting, to get the miniatures to look good as they do in Warhammer 40K.
Okay, so looking at sort of the historical tactics that Games Workshop or Warhammer 40K has been using to sort of draw their customers, they haven't been doing the best of a job. One of their big tenets that they said from the beginning of this IP is that they want to make a miniature set, not a game, which means that there's a lot more focus on buying the individual pieces and buying all the accessories for those pieces, rather than creating a very cohesive and workable game. Due to this fact, they've been a lot less receptive to feedback, because they are a large company and they do service a lot of IPs and brands and just products in general. So their feedback in regard to the game is not taken as seriously as others. There's also a very narrow supply chain, and they're very restricted about who sells what. Games Workshop is famous for being very protective of their IP up until relatively recently. But even now, they're very selective with who they give their IP to and what parts of the IP they do give to certain people. They're very stingy, very careful, almost to their detriment. The last point is that because they're making a very premium product, people put a lot of work and time into their miniatures, their average price is a lot higher, which increases their barrier to entry for new players, which for some companies is fine. For Games Workshop, they've been around for 40 years, it's probably not their major concern. But I can tell you from personal experience and from what I've been looking at the data that this is a big issue. That initial cost to play games is just too high sometimes.
All right, when we talk about historical, that's cool. But let's talk about what's happening locally, because we don't care about Vermont and what's actually happening out in our environment and out in our community. So games like the one I have in Middlebury, game stores, the one that I'm closely related to, this game store focuses more on the people, those interpersonal connections, because when you actually have those interpersonal connections with people, you tend to sell more product. So my friend Everett, who runs the store a lot of the time, will be like, all right, so like, what are you looking for? Then he'll dive deeper into it. And then they talk about 40K, and he starts talking about, oh, have you heard about their new product, like these get collecting boxes? Like $85 for like $125 worth of models. It's insane. And by doing that, he gains interest into like, oh, the cost of entry is actually lower than I thought. Tell me more. And by doing that, he sells more and more product by saying, yes, it's getting cheaper, the company's changing around, they switched like how the leadership was done, because originally for the past couple years it looked like it was led by their legal team and not by their actual development team. So that's why like Games Workshop has been shifting itself. And like when Legion came out, we talked about how much like we played like the Star Wars RPG system, which is closely linked with Legion itself. So when we do that, we're like, oh cool, now I have miniatures for that system. I can just buy those. And by doing that, he's getting people to buy what would normally be like a $25 purchase and upping it to a $90 purchase without them really noticing, because it's high involvement. It's kind of like when you buy a car. You want to see what the miniatures look like. You want to see like how they're painted and what's cool about them instantly. So what he does is he actually has something already painted that people donate, or the company gives it to them for them to actually play. And by doing that, he's like, oh, you actually want to learn how to play? That's awesome. Let's play it. And by doing that specifically, he's getting people accustomed to the game and finding out why it's fun. It's kind of like game development where you want to find that fun really, really quickly so you can get a higher attainment and actual interest.
So after our day collection at several local stores, we came away with a number of interesting figures. The first of which being, why do people play? The main two categories were for the story and for the actual gameplay. And oddly enough, about 2/3 of the players play for the story. Going into this, I would imagine that they play more for the game itself, but it turns out that the Warhammer universe is very engaging, very deeply connected, both to different IPs and just to a very interesting and complex story that they've been building for 40 or so years. So, yeah. Second point is that what players find investing in is not actually the actual miniatures themselves, it's the tools, more specifically the paintbrushes. A lot of people I talked with actively gushed about the quality of their paintbrushes and how sturdy and how stable and how nice they painted, which is also interesting considering that you would think that people have a lot more value within their miniatures rather than their tools, but actually it's the other way around. Less than 10% of players use painting outside of the game. This holds true for a lot of different skills developed within the crafts such as painting and filing and construction. A lot of these skills stay within the game, which does not suggest a lot of linking purchases to possibly things outside the game, like actual painting, craftsmanship in other ways. And the last point is that the biggest criticism these players have is the price. The price is higher even for people who said that's a high price and they still don't get into that. They still think that the price is pretty high. When we talked to them about possibly alternatives, they said that they're also all looking very closely at Legion, which was something that we stated before. Legion is looking as a very interesting alternative that is both lower in price and has a more recognizable IP. So that could possibly attract more people, but we will certainly have to wait and see until that has a noticeable impact within half a year, possibly.
Agreed. So let's talk about for a minute, why does this data matter? Why does Vermont matter? Why does Wargaming matter? Well, because when you look at this, they're no different than people who collect Ferraris. They're no different than the people who collect high-value items. They're doing it because they like the item. And when these people they're seen as collectors, above all players. That's why they're different. And when you're looking at how do Ferrari dealers do it? Ferraris don't actually have what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't have their own video ads. They don't have paper ads in case it's in a magazine, kind of like Warhammer's specific ads are in gaming magazines. They have very similar marketing appeals. So you can use pretty much this game, Warhammer 40K, or any War Machine or Star Wars Legion, for example. You can use the people who are buying these games and use the same marketing tactics that they're using to sell sports cars, which is mind-blowing. Because when you look at it, they're doing the same thing. They're buying something they probably don't need, because I think they can probably get away with a little Passat, but they will. I want a Ferrari. I want that status symbol. The people who are buying 40K, they're not buying Warhammer Hordes. They're not buying Star Wars Legion because I want to be proven, show my worth by saying I play Warhammer 40K. I get into this. I like the lore. I want to build and play with these miniatures, and that's why it's so incredibly important. Is because by doing all this, they're projecting what they want to be, and that's how they're actually purchasing, and that drives how you make those sales.